Greetings and welcome once again to the Gaming Codex, the show where I try to explain to you all the various words and terms used to describe video games in the video games industry. Today's term is that of survival, in the sense of survival games. And according to a general definition, survival games are a subgenre of action video games set in a hostile, intense, open-world environment where players generally begin with minimal equipment and are required to collect resources, craft tools, weapons, and shelter and survive as long as possible. Many survival games are based on randomly or procedurally generated persistent environments. More recently created games are often playable online, allowing multiple players to interact in a single persistent world. Survival games are generally open-ended with no set goals and are often closely related to the survival horror genre, in which the player must survive within a supernatural setting such as a zombie apocalypse. This is from Wikipedia, so half of it is wrong and was written by the same people that probably still call MOBAs action RTSs or insist that The Witcher 1 is an action RPG. I've met these people on the internet. A survival game is not a subgenre of the action video game genre because it does not require an action component. Survival is simply that, survival. There is a game where it's not about what enemy you must defeat, what story you must untangle, what mystery you must weave, or the other way around. It is about your character not dying of hunger, thirst, blood loss, some disease, not pooping, or other elements that require constant attention. It's not really tied into the survival horror genre either, because in those kinds of games, apart from your health, you only have to manage combat related resources, ammo, mostly ammo, whereas in a survival game you have to manage a whole lot more than that. And the genres, I wouldn't say evolve one from the other, because mechanics relating to food, to thirst, those have been around in a lot of games way before survival horror became a thing as things are, even before Alone in the Dark. Honestly, I think even before Project Firestart. These were elements you would find in early roguelikes, in early RPGs in general, dating back to the early 80s. Possibly even some of the many mainframe games that were around back then. And before that, it comes from most pen and paper RPGs, from Dungeons and Dragons, where most game masters will remind you that your characters are people. They need to eat, they need to drink, and if they don't, then they will have penalties. For example, they will have -2 to all the rolls, and when a bear comes along and they try to kill it so they can eat it, the bear may just run off and leave them wondering what's gonna happen, and you won't know because the last week's session was cancelled, and you're gonna have one more week to wait, and maybe the GM won't remember that your characters have not had even a drop of water in like a week or something and doesn't notice. As the idea evolved, it didn't necessarily have its own genre for a while. It was more of an offshoot of different genres. It was a part of different games. And yes, some of them were action games. Some of them were not. Some of them were turn-based. Some of them were more top-down kind of experiences. Some of them were even strategies in a way, because you had to manage several people that would die if they did not get their needs met. In a really kind of offshoot way, you could think of The Sims as a survival game where you have to survive in a modern urban setting. You do have needs that need to be met, and your character will die permanently if those needs are not met. But we don't necessarily think of The Sims as a game that is part of the survival genre. No, mostly that comes down to the popular definition, which is hardcore. A survival game is for men, real men, and manly women too. Manly kids, manly grandpas, manly grandmas, manly everybody. It's the outdoors when the mountain men, I would make a reference to the old Disney Zorro cartoon, but nobody would get it. It's the concept that you are pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps and you are surviving in a hostile world that is out to get you, and you You have to do everything yourself. You have to be rough and tough and fight against the environment, and you have to make sure that the world is tamed by your touch, which in some cases involves making a dinosaur into a mobile siege headquarters, because that's what you can do in Ark. And it's not a wrong interpretation of the genre. I mean, that's what you do in a lot of them. You reach an empty field with some trees, and you start punching the trees until your fists no longer bleed and wood falls out, and then you use the wood to create things that will allow you to punch different trees with more efficiency. But again, that's not really the only interpretation of this kind of game. It's not just Minecraft or all the games pretending to be Minecraft, but for adults with the naked people. Actually, no, not for adults, for teenagers that pretend they don't like Minecraft in public, because in private, you know, they do. You also have strategy games that are very much survival focused. RimWorld is a good example of this. You have turn-based RPGs that are survival focused. Neo Scavenger is a great example of this. And the mechanic of survival has been inserted into many games. One where I think it's still not prevalent in would be the racing game genre, where you would think it would kind of work, because as a pilot you do have to control, you know, your needs, if you get my drift, while you're driving. And we've seen it in multiplayer games as well. And I don't mean cooperative multiplayer games, I don't know. I mean competitive ones, like The Ship. The Ship actually predates a lot of the current craze of the survival game, where you would have to meet your needs and explore a very complex world that could allow your needs to be met, but at the same time you would be hunted by others and must hunt others. It's a bit of a stretch, like it's not a pure survival game. It's not what you'd think instantly when you visualize survival. It's not The Ship that comes to mind, it's DayZ more likely, where you also have to fight against people, against zombies, against the elements, against diseases, against hackers probably. While initially mostly relegated to a lot of indie games and a lot of low budget titles, the concept of survival has become a core component of larger games, which leads us to the marketing definition. That game where you've got bars constantly running out, no matter what you do. Survival is now a core component of some major AAA titles, one of the latest ones being Fallout 76, which is a survival game, because you do have to manage your needs, your thirst, your hunger, and you do this in a persistent online world with a lot of other people. But how should I put this? The way most games implement the idea of needs, of hunger, of thirst, of needing to sleep, is that once the need is satisfied to 100%, it will immediately begin draining quite quickly, to the point where it becomes a chore to feed yourself, to find water, to find a place to sleep, to find something else you need, and still enjoy the rest of the game. We've spoken about this one time in the Game Tales episode dedicated to Fallout New Vegas, that games don't really take into account the fact that a human can overeat and then be quite full for a while and not need to munch down constantly on something. So in most cases, well not most, but in a lot of cases, the survival mechanic is simply relegated to those needs that must be met and aren't really adding anything to the game. They're just a thing that will keep you busy long enough for you to realize that maybe the rest of the game isn't that hot. It can be a bit of a distraction. And some people will find it enjoyable. I mean, it adds an extra layer of difficulty to a game that otherwise may be too easy, too lackluster, too uninteresting. But when that becomes the sole component, it also can be a bit The Sims. It can be a bit The Sims without most expansions. Survival is here to stay. It is. Okay, it's not in its glory phase anymore. That peaked about a week after PUBG was released, but it is still something that people would like to see in games, and big companies consider it as being something that will attract some crowds if it is implemented in some way in a game. So closes another chapter of the Gaming Codex. Come back next time for a brand new subject. Goodbye.